Okay, what does the marginalist revolution refer to? Is the simultaneous co-discovery of what we call the principle of marginal utility. And it was discovered actually by three people that were widely separated by location. An Austrian, Karl Menger, a Briton, William Stanley Jevons, and finally a native Frenchman who then went to Switzerland, Leon Walras. Okay? And as I said, it was discovered pretty much concurrently. Two books in 1871, one by Menger, one by Jevons. The third book came out in 1874. According to the best evidence, they really didn't know each other before the publication of their works. Now, Jevons and Walras were both trained in mathematics. Okay, Jevons was in the natural sciences. He was a physicist and also a chemist. And Walras was an engineer. So they both conceived of what I will explain as marginal utility. They conceived of this concept as really a quantity of a substance that could be mathematically manipulated, added, subtracted, divided, and so on. Okay, but Menger, who was trained in Roman law, also was a journalist who focused on commodity markets and focused on human actions, conceived of it much differently. Okay, according to Menger, it was really the outcome. It was the outcome of a human choice and a judgment. It was really a relationship between a human mind and concrete units of a good, whether it be apples, horses, whatever it may be. If you take a look at Jevons and Walras, it's nice to put pictures to the names. Both quite distinguished looking gentlemen. Okay. Menger now, however, discovered much more. What he did was he used this principle to create a theory of price that was based on subjective values and human choices, and that resulted in the creation of an overall theory of price. Okay, so he started with marginal utility, but he didn't end there. Okay? He broadened it so that he outlined an explanation of the overall economy. And in so doing, he did found the Austrian School of Economics. Let me give you some quotes by prominent historians of economics about Menger's role. Joseph Schumpeter said, Menger is nobody's pupil, and what he created stands. Menger's theory of value, price, and distribution is the best we have up to now. And that was in the 1920s when Schumpeter wrote that. Schumpeter is recognized as one of the leading historians of thought. He was taught by Austrian economists, but he had other influences such as Walras and so on. So he was a partisan of mathematical economics, but he still said this about Menger. Ludwig von Mises, who knew Menger and was a pupil of Menger's best student, boehm-bawerk, said that what is known as the Austrian School of Economics started in 1871 when Karl Menger published a slender volume, Principles of Economics in English, until the end of the 70s. There was no Austrian school. There was only Karl Menger. Okay, and finally, a follower of Mises in at least his business cycle and monetary theory, F.A. Hayek, Nobel Prize winner, and also a very eminent historian of thought, said that the Austrian school's fundamental ideas belong fully and wholly to Karl Menger. What is known to the members of what is common to the members of the Austrian school, what constitutes their peculiarity and provided the foundations of their later contributions, is their acceptance of the teachings of Karl Menger. Okay, so knowledgeable historians of thought were all of the same opinion. Okay, Menger was the founder of the Austrian school. There were some pre-Austrian economists, which you'll hear about later on, There was a subjective value theory that stretched way back to the Spanish scholastics. Okay, but the school itself, its characteristic price theory, its characteristic focus on individual action and choice was all Carl Menger's doing. Okay, he had many influences in constructing this overall system of economics, but he was the one who synthesized it. He was the one who extended it to explain all phenomena of economics. And here's a picture of Menger. I'm sorry, that's a prominent contemporary Austrian economist. We'll talk more about him later. There's Menger. Okay, kind of got a goth look going there. He confided later on in life that he was that he would have been in much better shape physically had he not spent his time in coffee houses and smoking and chasing women. Okay. So. Okay, now let's talk a little bit more about what Menger actually accomplished. Okay. And in order to understand what Menger accomplished, you have to understand the state of economics, okay, on the eve of the publication of his book. Economics was dominated by the classical school of economics, whose most eminent members were David Hume, Adam Smith, and David Ricardo. Okay? And that school dominated economics, certainly in the English-speaking world for the most part, and to some extent on the continent for roughly 100 years, until the Marginal Revolution. Now, what was their theory of economics, briefly? Well, briefly speaking, what the classical school did, okay, their accomplishments, and they were great, okay, was to recognize that prices were not determined by some accident or by arbitrary whim or by power, okay? The prices that we see every day, the short-run prices, the prices of gasoline, the prices of Big Mac hamburgers, the price of SUVs and so on, all of those things were determined by immutable laws, okay? And to sum it up, those were the laws of, or the law of supply and demand. Okay? These were, as I said, unchanging and universal, and they understood this. Secondly, they understood quite well and pointed out that these prices that were determined, at least in the short run, directed production, okay? So what they did was then to bring about a situation in which entrepreneurs, or what they call capitalists, would allocate resources to those areas where prices were highest, and they would, or profits were highest, and they would reduce the production in other areas where prices were below average cost of production. So just to give you a symbolic representation of how they conceived of prices regulating production, they said, let's just say the demand for something goes up. If you look at the top line there, let's say the demand for SUVs increase. Okay, the price will go up. It'll go up above average cost. Okay, suddenly they'll find that profits are above some normal level. The normal level being a return to their capital. Okay, it was pretty much equalized throughout the economy. At that point, you would have new capitalists entering that industry, producing more SUVs, and the ones that were already there expanding their production. Okay, so supply, okay, would increase, but over time, as supply increased, if there were no change in demand, then you begin to see, downward arrow indicates, a fall again of price toward its natural or long-run level. Okay. On the other hand, if there was a fall in demand for something, if suddenly now hand calculators are introduced into the market and their price begins to come down from $350, let's say, to $10 or $5 as they are today. When they first were introduced in 1969-70, they were approximately $350. Not many people had them. Some business people did. What did people use instead? What did college students use, high school students? Well, they used something you probably have never seen. It's called a slide rule. Okay, good old plastic slide rule. And depending on where you carried it, determined how cool you were. Okay, so if you had it in here with a pocket protector and a bunch of pens, you were just sort of passé. But if you carry in your back pocket, which you cracked a lot, but you're still cool, you got to go out and buy them, again and again. So if the demand would fall for these things, and prices would fall below average cost, profit then would fall, and people would move out of that industry. Same thing happened to the typewriter industry when PCs were introduced and so on. So the classical school understood these principles, okay? That prices were not accidental. They were not determined by power relationships. They were determined by supply and demand. The problem was that they focused on the business of man as the center of production. The reason why they did this is that because they did not have a good theory of demand. They really didn't have much of a theory of demand at all. They said, yes, for something to be produced, it must be in demand, okay? But they didn't say much more than that. So they placed the business decision maker at the center. So this is where the construct of economic man comes from, homo economicus, someone who buys on cheap markets and sells on markets where prices are high. Okay, and the classical economics has been caricatured because of this. But they were trying to drive towards a theory of action. It's just that they didn't have the tools to bring the consumer in as the central focus of economics. And that's, as we'll see, where Karl Menger comes in. Okay. Let me say a few other things about the classical school. Their problem was that they could not resolve what we call the paradox of value. Okay. Now, the reason why they couldn't resolve this paradox of value, which I'll explain in a moment, is that they thought in terms of abstract classes of goods. They would say things like, why is it that diamonds, which do not have much use value to the human race, okay? They're certainly not required for their subsistence and their flourishing. Why is it that these diamonds have a very high price, yet a low use value? That is, they have a high exchange value, which is a price on the market, but a low use value. Whereas on the other hand, something like bread, which is, especially in the 19th century, when the classical school was flourishing, the staple of life, okay, it was called the staff of life. Everyone needed it to stay alive and so on. Why is it that bread has such a low exchange value or price on the market, yet it has such a high use value, okay, to human beings? They couldn't answer this question. Now, others in another tradition on the continent came close to the correct answer. The subjective value economists in Italy and France, okay? So one problem with classical economics was that they really split goods into two categories. They said, okay, some goods that can be reproduced, most goods which can be reproduced, okay, such as bread and other everyday items, all types of crops and carts and horses can be bred. All of those things have their price determined by, in the long run, the cost of production. Okay, remember, I said in the long run, costs tend to determine price. Okay, that price tends towards the long run cost of production, including a return to capital. So cost took on, to many of them, the central role. That is, the cost of producing a good became the explanation for the price of the good. Right? Ricardo in particular skipped over the short run analysis and focused on the long run analysis. So it was either prices determined by cost of production, money costs, or by the amount of labor hours. So in some sense then, there was some sort of metaphysical substance, some objective thing out there that through the production process was infused into goods to give them value. Okay? That is, the more labor sweat on the thing to make it, the more valuable it was. So for them, goods became, or the value of goods became objective. Okay. Now that, as I said, caused them to split their price theory into two, to bifurcate it. Okay. To say, well, yeah, other things, like people said, well, what about paintings by Dutch masters, old paintings from the Middle Ages? Why does that have value? Why does it have such high value? They said, well, those are scarcity goods. Same thing is true of land. Okay, no one produced land. Why does it have such high value? Okay, well, that's scarcity. Those are scarcity goods. They're scarce in relation to demand, so their price is very high. So they had not a unitary or single theory of value, but they had this sort of bifurcated or split theory of value. So let me sum up the classical approach. They believe that value was inherent in goods, that it was sort of infused into the goods by the production process, that the value of the output of the process was determined by the value of the inputs. Okay. That value was measured by either cost of production in terms of money or by number of labor hours. And that exchange of two goods, at least in the long run, represented exchange of things of equal value. So those were sort of the core of at least classical price theory. Now, this is where Menger comes into the picture. Now, he did not intend to, far from the notion of revolution, he didn't intend to literally overthrow the classical school. He liked the fact that the classical school claimed that laws, economic laws, were immutable and universal. He liked their short-run price theory. He believed that prices were determined by supply and demand. Okay. So what he wanted to do was to really complete the classical project. Okay, to move from the businessman as a center and make him only sort of an intermediary actor to the consumer as a center of economics. And there's a number of very, very telling quotes by Menger. In the preface of his book, Principles of Economics, he pointed out that what he wanted to do was to unify all economic phenomena, the explanation of production, prices, wages, interest rates, okay, under one principle, and to make it realistic. Okay, he was interested in explaining real prices as we see them every day, not as they will tend to be in some long run, years down the line, okay, but the prices of Chick-fil-A sandwiches right now, the price of a used car at a dealership right now, what's actually being paid, the price is being paid in supermarkets at this very moment, okay, all over the country, and certainly all over this town, let's say. So he wrote, I have devoted special attention to the investigation of the causal connections between economic phenomena involving products and the corresponding agents of production, not only for the purpose of establishing a price theory based upon reality and placing all price phenomena, including interest, wages, ground rents, together under one unified point of view, but also because of the important insights we thereby gain into many other economic processes heretofore completely misunderstood. Okay? So he wanted a comprehensive, integrated theory of economics. Okay. Now, what did he do? Right at the beginning, okay, when he was writing his book, he wrote notes to himself. And we have these notebooks. And he placed man at the center of economics. He said, man himself, okay, not goods, not indifference curves, okay, but man himself is the beginning and the end of every economy. He also said that our science is a theory of human beings' ability to deal with his wants. Also, since this process of want satisfaction, okay, of satisfying the many wants that human beings have. Now, let me mention that man, according to Menger and the Austrians that followed him, is not some sort of an ideal man, some sort of Platonic ideal. This was man as we know him, man who was defective, incomplete, okay, and I use those words for a specific reason. That is, people are not fully satisfied. They are incomplete. They are defective. They are imperfect, okay? They're continuously striving to reach higher levels of satisfaction as they themselves judge satisfaction. And what Menger recognized is that they have to use elements of their environment, elements of the objective world, okay, which we will see are called goods, to satisfy those wants. So he introduced the notion of causality. The very first sentence of the Principles of Economics, of the first chapter, that's the very first sentence. All things are subject to the law of cause and effect. Okay? Wants, desires, induce human beings to take elements of their environment and combine them in a way that will satisfy, that will cause the satisfaction of these wants and desires. So Menger wrote out to himself, again in his notes that we have, what I call the Trinities of Causation. The ends, okay, that human beings have, whatever they may be, okay, whether you're a murderer or you're a great inventor, okay, you have certain ends. And to achieve those ends, okay, you must then have means. So the ends cause people to strive for various means, okay, which in turn will cause the realization of the ends. So there's dual causation here. It goes from subjective cause to objective, okay, the goods, back to subjective, that is, the satisfaction. So he also wrote man, external world, subsistence. Man turns to the external world, and from the external world, he's able to win his subsistence by acting. Wants, goods, satisfaction, okay? That was the other trinity that he used, okay? There were wants, stimulated the search for goods, okay, and the production of goods, and when those goods were consumed, okay, that satiated the want. Okay, that brought about the satisfaction. Okay, so causality played a central role in Menger. Very important to realize that. And in this, he was following the great 19th century French economist, who was not a classical economist, Frederick Bastiat, who entitled one of the chapters in his unfinished, posthumously published work, Economic Harmonies. He entitled the chapter Wants, Efforts, and Satisfaction. So that certainly is echoed in the trinity of causality here that we see Menger wrote out to himself. Okay. Well, let's look at the middle term of that trinity, the goods. Okay. What was interesting was that almost every German textbook up to Menger started with something called a theory of the good, which is dropped out of economics. Okay. Goods are physical things in economic textbooks. They're taken for granted. They're never explained. But Menger explained them. He said, look, for a thing to be a good, we must have a human need or want. Secondly, the thing must have such properties as render the thing capable of being brought into causal connection with the satisfaction of a need. So if your human need, for example, is hunger, then you know that, let's say, a Big Mac will assuage that hunger, okay, or a cheeseburger in general will assuage that hunger. So that's a second precondition. The third precondition is that the human being has knowledge of this causal connection, the causal connection between the good and the satisfaction of the hunger. That you know, maybe from past experience, that every time you've eaten a cheeseburger, you had your hunger satisfied, okay? And you therefore project that into the future, and you believe then that you will reach a higher level of welfare by consuming that hamburger. And third, you have to have command of the thing sufficient to direct it to the satisfaction of the need, okay? That is, if you own chopped meat, and you own cheese, and you own bread, okay, or you own the monetary funds to purchase those things, you can go out and you can then control the means that are necessary. You can bring them together according to some recipe, which we'll talk about, into the final good, which is a hamburger, consume it, and have your wants satisfied, okay? Now, notice something here. That fourth thing is very, very important, okay? There are many pleasant things that we want and having more would help us, okay? But we don't have control of them. For example, my son called me up the other day, and told me he was going to a Phillies game, and I live in New Jersey, so he was going down to Philadelphia to see a game. I'm a Mets fan, but he hates the Mets, so he'd rather travel all the way down to Philadelphia, even though we're closer to New York, to see a game. And he was, of course, a sunny day has very high value. Okay, unfortunately, it was raining that day, and that's like the second or third time a game that he was going to was rained out. Well. Is a sunny day a good? No, a sunny day is not a good. Okay? It's a condition of your welfare, but it's not a good. Why? Because we can't control yet, you know, the technology to control the weather. Okay? I'll give you a more ghoulish example. I'm a big Beatles fan. I'd love to see a Beatles reunion. We don't have the technology to bring George and John back. Okay? So, a good must satisfy all of those 4 criteria. But Menger was wrong, and Ludwig von Mises pointed this out. Okay, how was he wrong? Okay, well, people take pseudo remedies for many diseases, okay? Things that do not work, okay? Things for which there is no causal connection between their need and the satisfaction of that need. Okay? Whatever area of consumption, okay, this occurs. Okay? So what Mises pointed out was that you have to replace 2 and 3 with the statement that someone must have an opinion or a belief that the thing has the capability of satisfying their want or need. Okay? You don't have to have knowledge. We know that, for example, primitive tribes believed that if they did a rain dance or if they had some ritual offering to the gods, this would bring about rain and they would have good crops. We know that that is an incorrect technology. Okay? Yet the people who perform those rituals earned money for that. Okay? Their services were a good to those people. Right? So now Menger actually did recognize this later in the book, and he called them imaginary goods. Okay? Well, all goods are imaginary in the sense that we must imagine a state of satisfaction that proceeds from the fact that at some point when we consume that good, we have reached a higher level of satisfaction or welfare. Okay? Or, to use a word I'll explain, utility. Okay? Now let's get to economic goods. Okay? Menger distinguished between goods in general and economic goods. He said that economic goods are goods whose quantities are insufficient to fully satisfy all the human needs for them. Okay? They were, in other words, scarce goods. Economic goods are scarce goods. Okay. For example, we have this air. Okay? Air is essential to us living more than 3 or 4 minutes. But yet it's superabundant. There's more than enough of air in the atmosphere that if we lost 1 cubic foot or thousands of cubic feet of air, there would be no effect on people's satisfaction. Okay? People would be no worse off. So in that sense, air is not a good or is not an economic good. Now, air, let's say in space, in a space capsule, or air fathoms and fathoms beneath the sea, that is certainly scarce, and people are willing to pay money for it. Air is an economic good. Okay? It depends on, as we'll see, the situation. Menger always focused on what he called the concrete units of the good. Okay? Let me mention something else. Petroleum was a byproduct of kerosene, which people used to light and heat their houses in the 19th century. But they didn't know how to use petroleum to serve their wants. So petroleum was just this black runoff that they didn't care about. Okay, it was basically seen as garbage until the technology developed. Then it became a good. So things that are not goods can become goods, okay, and vice versa. Okay. By the way, the fact that something is rare doesn't make it a good either. Okay, it has to be desirable. So the parasite that causes malaria is very rare, fortunately, in developed countries. Yet, of course, it's not a good, okay, because number 1 is violated. Right. All right. So Menger pointed out that all goods attain a value because they're scarce in relation to human needs. Okay. And that this is where marginal utility came in. He defined marginal utility as the satisfaction that one derives from the good that, if one has a stock of goods, from that unit of the good that is applied to the lowest valued end. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the paradox of value. What Menger was trying to do when he discovered the principle of marginal utility was to solve this paradox. Okay, how do we explain the much higher price of diamonds on the market than bread? So Menger had a brilliant insight, and his insight was to focus on people's needs, okay, that is concrete needs, and concrete units of goods. And he used an example, which I'll use, a similar example, in which he assumed that there was someone who was alone, a Robinson Crusoe type character, on an island. Okay, stranded on an island. And he had a scale of needs, okay? That is, since goods are scarce, Menger recognized that when you had units of goods, you use them to satisfy your most important wants. And you rank these wants according to their importance to you. So let's say this Robinson Crusoe character has a scale of wants for grain, okay? And let's say he has a stock of 5 units of grain, 5 sacks, okay, that he's just harvested. And his most important wants, as they are ordinarily ranked here, is the first sack will be used to bake bread, and that will be able to just keep him alive for a year, okay? The second sack would be used for baking more bread, which would then make him healthy and vital and enable him to achieve other ends, okay? So it would give him strength and so on, not just allow him to exist. The third would be used for a future harvest. He'd use it as seed for a future harvest. The fourth most important one for this sack would be to produce whiskey or well, I prefer vodka, so. Okay. The fifth would be to vary his diet. Let's say he would use it for feed for farm animals, okay, which would yield meat and dairy and poultry products, okay. But his wants would go on for these sacks of grain, right? They wouldn't be unlimited. At some point, he might have a surplus of them. That is, after the 20th want was satisfied, okay. He might actually use it to lure game into traps so that he could kill wild game and so on. There are many things he could do with it, okay. But he only has 5 sacks, right? And he puts them in storage, and he earmarks them for these uses. He's about to start using them, and a pack of rodents that night break in, and they consume, let's say they consume the second sack, okay? The sack that he has mentally earmarked for baking bread. Okay? So here's the question that Menger posed. What Menger said was, what is the value of a sack of grain, okay, for this farmer? He has 5, right? This is prior to the rodents. What's the value? Is it the value of the highest ranked use? The value that he attaches to staying alive itself? Or is it some average value of the 5? Or is the value of each sack different? That is, even though they're identical, is the value different for each sack? Okay? Well, Menger had a brilliant sort of epiphany about how to solve this problem. And it said that the great ideas were the simplest ideas, and his idea was very, very simple, and it was a great idea. What if he loses one? What if the rodents break in and consume the second sack of grain? Will he forego that second use? Of course not. Of course not. He's a human being striving to satisfy wants of greater and lesser importance. Each unit is a specific unit, okay, but they're all interchangeable. They're identical with one another. What will he do? We know what he'll do. Okay, all of us would just do it. Reallocate the 5th sack to the second use. Okay? That's the law of marginal utility. Basically, what he's saying is that the value. He didn't coin the term, by the way, marginal utility. One of his students, Ludwig von Mises, did so. Okay? The value of that last use, Menger called it sometimes a dependent use. Okay? The value of the sack of grain depended on that last use, the lowest ranked use that his stock of the good will satisfy. Because no matter which one of the 5 he loses, what does he lose? He loses the utility, now we'll use the term utility, which means satisfaction, from the lowest ranked use of that stock. Okay? So, what is the value of the sack? The value of the sack is the expected satisfaction from having some beef and chicken in your diet, okay, to this person. Now, the law of marginal utility states that the lower the stock of the good, the less the quantity of the goods you own, the higher the value. And now we see why. After the rodents have consumed one of the sacks, now what happens to the value of each sack? They go up to reflect a higher margin utility, the fourth want. Okay? And if in fact there were only 3 sacks, then he would value all 3 according to the value of staying alive another year in the future. Okay? That is the value of the third sack. Right. So Menger solved the problem and applied this almost immediately to the paradox of value. Now we see how to solve that problem. Okay. Why is it in a normal situation that diamonds have a higher value than bread, not a higher price on the market than bread, and a higher value? Well, in relation to human wants in a normal situation, they're much more scarce than bread. Okay. The classical economists sort of said, well, use value is important as a basis of goods having value, but we're putting it aside. We're going to say a diamond has higher value because it's more expensive to produce, okay, than bread is. Whereas as Menger really turned all of this on its head and said that, in fact, it's the value, as we'll see, that causes people to incur great costs to produce these valuable goods. So change the situation. Now you have that perfect diamond in your pocket. Okay, it was an $8 million diamond, right? It was a purple diamond that Kobe Bryant, when he was unfaithful to his wife, had purchased her. Let's say you have this in your pocket, okay? And you haven't had water in 3 days, or 4 days, whatever it is. I think you can go 5 days without water. All right. And someone comes up with a pint of water. Okay. Would you trade the water for the diamond? Or would you give away the diamond for the water? Sure you would. Why? Because now water is so scarce that the use of water, of the first pint of water, staying alive for another 4 or 5 days, far exceeds the satisfaction of the want given by that diamond. Okay? So the greater the stock of the good, the greater the supply of the good, the lower the margin utility. That is, you serve lower and lower wants, and therefore the lower the value. And that's why air has no value. Air has no value. Not only does it not have a price, air has zero value in a normal situation. Not one of us would give even a second of labor to obtain any extra air right now, okay? Or pay even a penny to obtain extra air. It's not because air doesn't serve very important needs, okay? In fact, the supramarginal needs, the needs that are above the margin, the supramarginal needs are very important, okay? So the first cubic foot of air might be serve the most important want. But that's not how value is determined. It's always determined, as Menger so brilliantly pointed out, by the marginal use. Now let me just give you a little exercise here. Let's say you're a farmer, and you have 3 horses and 2 cows. Now these animals are not identical. The horses have different uses than the cows. But remember, in the real world, we rank hundreds and hundreds, if not possibly a million goods, maybe not a million, but hundreds, if not hundreds of thousands. In fact, the normal supermarket has, I think 27,000 items. Okay, so when you go through a supermarket, you are ranking these different items. Okay, that are not identical with one another. You're comparing their margin utilities and comparing that in turn to money. In any case, let's just take 2 goods to make it simple. So horses can be used for riding, for pulling things, and so on. Cows can give milk. They can give hides, that is their skin, and so on, for clothing. They can give milk that you can turn into butter and cheese, and so on. So here I've set out this hypothetical, if you will, value scale. Okay, so let's look at that now. Okay, the most important horse to the farmer is the one that's going to pull his plow. The second horse is going to be able to make pushing the plow even easier, so he'll have a team of horses pulling the plow. Okay, the third greatest use is for milk. The fourth is which can only be served by a cow. The fourth, which can only be served by a cow, is for cheese and butter. And the fifth, which can only be served by a horse, is for pleasure riding. Okay, which animal is more valuable? Well, simple way to determine it. All right, give me your answer. Okay, thanks for setting me up. No, absolutely not. Okay. I'll explain why not, and you'll never say that again. Okay. Here's the reason. Assume the barn's on fire, and the farmer can save 4 of the animals. Which one does he leave in the barn? Horse. So how can the horse be more valuable than the cow? In this situation, okay, the horse is less valuable. Why? Because it serves a lower ranked use. It has a lower what? Marginal utility. Okay? Now, once that horse has perished in the fire, what animal is the most valuable? You can answer that now. No, once the horse has perished. Okay, marginal utility of the horse is now higher, right? It's the second use. Marginal utility of the cow is the fourth use. So the horse becomes more valuable. So the values can change relative to one another depending on the situation, not only of your own wants, even if the wants stay constant, okay, it depends on the situation of the ownership of these concrete units of the good. Okay? So this was a complete breakthrough. Okay? There were other economists in the continental tradition that actually hinted at this. Okay? Came very close to the principle of marginal utility, but as close as they came, they never saw the implications of this for the whole system of economics. This was really Menger's achievement. Some historians have thought actually will bring up specific people and they'll quote them and you'll say, yeah, that is the principle of marginal utility. But they never did anything more with it. Okay? So even if someone did actually discover the principle in this sense, then it was only Menger. Okay, and I don't believe that that's even true, but even if they did, it's only Menger that pushed it to a whole system of economics. Now, Jevons and Walras, to go back to the other two, didn't talk about concrete units of a good. They talked about these little atoms of goods. Okay, that is that utility was really a quantity. That the more ice cream you ate, okay, so every ounce of ice cream you eat has a lower and lower utility, which could be measured. Okay. So the 16th ounce of ice cream might have, a utility of 5, okay, whereas the first ounce has a utility of, let's say, 20. Okay, that's nonsense. You can't, utility or satisfaction is like, as one economist pointed out in the 1930s, is like love. Okay, you can say that you love one, let's say you're dating 3 women, you love one woman more than another, and the second woman more than the third woman. But when you choose one to marry, okay, you've demonstrated you prefer that person, that you love them more, they give you more satisfaction, but you do not demonstrate that you like the first one 3 times as much as you love the second one, and you love the second one twice as much as you love the first one. That's ridiculous. Okay. Some people say, well, you can use money to measure utility. So I went to a few years ago, I went to see Paul McCartney play at the Madison Square Garden. And the same summer, I also saw Rod Stewart play at in New Jersey. And so I would have spent probably up to $150 on the Paul McCartney ticket. And then I spent something like $75 on the Rod Stewart ticket. Does that mean I like Paul McCartney twice as much as Rod Stewart? Or does it just mean that I like Paul McCartney more than Rod Stewart? Well, of course, it means I like him more than Rod Stewart. There is no unit of measurement of satisfaction. Okay? There is no unit. Okay? Satisfaction is intensive. Okay? Measurement requires extensive units, like pounds and yards and so on, that are unchanging and fixed. But subjective values are continuously changing and they're intensive. There is no unit of measurement. Okay? That's very, very important. Menger didn't quite completely understand that. But he never made a big deal about it being measurable. Okay? His follower, boehm-bawerk, talked in terms of measurable utility, sometimes not. It was really finally Ludwig von Mises that purged the whole concept of any reference to measurability of satisfaction. But Menger and boehm-bawerk showed that in their system, okay, well, they were talking about it at first. They would say, well, yeah, they might indicate it could be measured or something, or they might make an offhand remark. But when they analyzed the economy, they never used the measurable concept. Okay, they use a strictly ordinal concept, and that's what's important. Okay. So we have a resolution of the value paradox. Now, Menger also pointed out, as I noted, that human beings are the center, okay, of economics, and they're the cause of value. Okay, value is really a relationship between a human mind and an object out there in our environment. Okay. Now, combine that with the fact that things don't grow on trees. Things that we call goods do not grow on trees. They have to be produced. We have to combine various elements of our environment, okay, and in some cases do it over a long period of time. So Menger realized that production took place over a period of time and proceeded in steps, okay, or what he called orders. So he said that, you know what, there were different orders of goods. So let me give you an example here. He said, if you want bread, okay, if you look at the top there, let me focus in a little bit more on that. Okay. In order to get bread, you first have to have wheat. Actually, it goes further back than that, right? I mean, you have to have farm implements, which you have to produce, okay? Wheat is a higher order good, right? So you produce the wheat, then you combine labor with it, okay? And in the next stage, then you transform it into flour. Remember, all production is a transformation. It's not a creation. As the great French economist Jean-Baptiste Say pointed out in 1802 or 1801 in his great treatise on political economy, he said that man cannot create anything. Only God creates. Okay, man can transform things, and that's what production is, a transformation. So then you take more labor and you transform the flour into bread. You use baker's labor. Okay, and so then you have the bread at wholesale and you have to distribute it. Okay, bring it to where you're going to consume it. So you then have means of transportation and labor and combine that with the bread at wholesale, and you bring it to the stage of being ready for consumption. Okay, so production proceeds downward. Now the classical economists would say, well, so does value proceed downward. That, well, the bread's valuable because we know that flour is valuable. And flour is valuable, or flours and ovens are valuable. And flour and ovens are valuable because the wheat's valuable and the labor is valuable that made the ovens and so on. But Menger said, no. Okay, remember, we have causality proceeding from the consumer. The consumer believes that bread is a good that will satisfy their wants. So while production proceeds downwards from what Menger called the higher orders, okay, higher order goods, to the lowest order good being a consumer good, he did point out that value proceeded upwards. Okay? That, in fact, if people didn't value bread, no one would value the wheat at all. An example I give my undergraduates when I teach this is, well, I used to when this movie was more relevant, but the Amish movie, the movie about Witness with Harrison Ford, it takes place in the Amish country. It's a very, very actually good movie, good crime thriller, and it really does faithfully show the Amish way of life. Okay, there's no Hollywood twist on it. It's straightforward. But they're called the plain people, and they're called the plain people for a very good reason, and that is that there's no ostentation in their dress. Okay, they want to avoid the failing of vanity. So not only don't they wear any jewelry, but they have absolutely no buttons. Okay. Because even buttons show a little bit of ostentation. Okay, they have hooks, and I don't know how they do it. I didn't look closely when I was there. But the key point here is, what if all Americans or everyone adopted sort of the Amish values, all right? And forgetting about the industrial uses of diamonds, if everyone was sort of anti-jewelry, what would happen to the value of diamonds? Well, we know they'd fall to zero. Now, what would happen to the high salaries that gem dealers and jewelers make? Well, that skill would no longer be worth that high wage or salary. Okay, now it'd fall to zero. What would happen to the shares in the diamond mine? If you own shares in a diamond mine, zero. Okay, so it's the value. Menger's law is that it's the value of the end that determines the value of the means, not the other way around. And there was an economist in actually a philosopher and economist. His name was Condillac. Who stated Menger's law in 1776, same year that Adam Smith was not stating it and confusing it. And Menger's law is, let me just, frozen. Okay. Here we go. Condillac. What Condillac said is that diamonds, or rather pearls, are not expensive because it takes a lot of time, effort, and trouble to dye for them, but rather men dye for pearls because they are so valuable. Okay? So, in other words, it's the value that causes all the effort to be expended. It's not the expenditure of the effort that causes the value. Okay? So it's the human being that what Menger calls imputes value to the first order goods, okay, and then back through the higher orders. That's why I have the value arrow going up. Okay. So, for example, then, all of the goods that are used in the second stage, in the second order, to produce the first order bread, their value depends on the bread. So if that stock of bread sells for $10,000 on the market, if that stock of bread sells for $10,000 on the market, well then, let's say the flour and the ovens will have a value of $10,000. Okay? So all the complementary goods in the next stage always reflect the value of the lower order good. So farmland and all the implements on the farm, let's say they produce corn, has value because of the corn that's currently produced and will be prospectively produced in the future using that land and the implements and tools and machinery. Okay? But now here was the problem that Menger solved. Menger wanted to go further. He said, now wait a minute. He says, in many production processes, it takes a lot of different higher stage goods to produce the output. Right? How do we determine the value of any one of those laborers or machines and so on? Okay. And this is where he talked about the imputation, okay, theory of imputation. And let's say then that someone's producing, let's say, 100 bushels of wheat on a farm. We have something that's called a production function. Let me just focus in this a little more. Okay, that top equation there. It's 100 bushels of wheat, okay, can be produced by using, let's say, 90 days of labor, okay, plus 2 horses, plus 1 plow, plus, I don't remember what the A was. Yeah, 40 acres of land, thank you. And 500 pounds of fertilizer, okay? Well, how do we break, so, and let's say that, that gives a certain utility, that 100 bushels. If the farm family is going to consume it itself, there's a certain utility or satisfaction of those bushels. The question is, how is that then imputed back to, let's say, a ton of fertilizer, 1 acre of land, 1 of the horses? How do we know the value of any of those things? Because they're all combined to transform the higher stage goods, which you bring together, into the output. Menger once again used that thought experiment. By the way, he didn't go out and empirically examine this and try to figure it out. He used logic, okay? Starting with this whole idea that people always want to satisfy more important wants and less important wants. So what he said was, let's say that we subtract 100 tons of fertilizer, okay, from this farm, right? And what happens to the output? Well, the output will fall. Okay, this is called the variable proportions production function. That simply means that you can produce the wheat by using different proportions. You can produce the wheat by using maybe no horses and using more labor to push the plows. Okay, or by getting rid of or cutting your acreage in half. Okay, you can vary the proportions of inputs to get wheat. Okay, you can always, over a certain range, use less fertilizer maybe and more horses, okay? Or less fertilizer and more land to get the same result too. And by the way, that's one of the important decisions that entrepreneurs make. Okay? Not only what good to produce, but what technology to use, how to combine the various inputs. So what Menger said was, let's say that the person spreads 100 less tons of fertilizer. Let's look at the output. Let's say the output goes from 100 wheats to 83 wheats. That is, he loses 17 bushels of wheat there. Okay? And, or let's say 10 bushels of wheat to make it, so I think, yeah, I wrote, 10, okay? So now what happens? What's called the marginal product, the marginal physical product of 100 tons of fertilizer is 10 bushels of wheat. Now, Menger didn't go this far because he didn't introduce money prices yet. This was supposed to be just an introduction, and he was going to write a 3-volume treatise on economics after it, which he never got to. But let's assume that you could sell each bushel for $3, okay? That would mean then that you are losing 10 bushels of wheat times the $3 per bushel revenue, it's $30. So 100 tons of fertilizer would then be worth exactly $30 on the market, not including the interest rate, which you'll get to later on, okay? That is called the theory of imputation. Not only did Menger say then, to sum up, that value of the higher order goods is determined by the lower order goods, but he pointed out that through marginal productivity analysis, which is very like marginal utility analysis, you could actually find out what each unit of each of the many goods that you're using to produce that output is worth. Okay? So if you take a very complicated good by a car, like an automobile, okay, and there are many orders of goods, okay, or inputs, hundreds of thousands of inputs that go into producing a car, many different kinds of labor and so on. Each one has a determinate price on the market. Each ton of steel, each gallon of paint, okay? Each laborer, whether it's an assembly line laborer or a laborer who makes parts and supplies them to the automobile, everybody has a price. How are those prices determined? Okay. Well, at least Menger showed us the direction. They're determined by marginal productivity. Okay. All right, I will stop here. And we have like a minute or two for questions. 2 minutes probably. Any questions? Yes.
I'm curious. You mentioned that you said that Smith used in 1776. Can you repeat what you said about Smith?
No, I said Smith confused the direction in which value went. Actually, in his earlier writings, he sort of had a subjective value notion before the Wealth of Nations. Okay. But in the Wealth of Nations, he believed in a cost of production theory of value.
The labor theory of value?
Well, he introduced that at one part, but he also introduced a money cost of production theory of value. Ricardo, who was his follower, focused more on labor theory of value. Yes.
You mentioned that the classical economists maintain that the exchange between two goods is an equal exchange. Or the exchange between two goods are equal value.
Right. Well, let me just mention, what Menger talked about was simply that because their tendency was that in the long run, the price was equal to the cost of production. Okay? So, if the cost of production of a hat was $10, okay, the cost of production of a coat was $100, then 10 hats, then the price of a hat would be $10 on the market, the price of a coat would be $100, and in effect, 10 hats would exchange for one coat. Equal costs would exchange for equal costs. Let me mention, that was the last point Menger made. Very quickly, Menger said that Smith was wrong in claiming that exchange comes about because people have a propensity to truck and barter. People like to trade, like little children trade baseball cards. Okay, I'm trivializing what Smith said, but it was along those lines. But what Menger pointed out, okay, and which I really didn't have time to get to, that exchange was based on a double inequality of value. So if you bought a USA Today newspaper today for $1, that implies that you value the newspaper more than the dollar that you gave up or anything else you could use that dollar for, and the seller valued the dollar more than the newspaper. So not only are the things being exchanged not equal, okay, they're doubly unequal, okay, because if they were equal in value, why would you take the time and trouble to exchange them? unless there's some inner propensity driving you to it. But rationally, people exchange because they value what they're getting more than what they're giving up. What they're getting has a higher margin of utility than what they're giving up. Okay, and Menger did point that out and went a little further than that, but I don't have time to go further than that now. Okay, so thank you.